My name is Alexander Morin, and I've spent more time underwater than on land. This is no exaggeration. Over 20 years of a professional diving career, I have explored shipwrecks in the most remote corners of the world's oceans. My specialty is archaeological dives to ships that have rested on the ocean floor for decades, if not centuries. Each dive is a journey into the past, an encounter with history frozen in the cold depths of the sea. I live in a small port town on the coast of the North Sea in a house inherited from my grandfather. An old fisherman, he spent his entire life at sea and died in his bed, gazing at the waves through the window. The house stands on a cliff, and from my study, I have a view of the vast expanse of water. It's here that I plan my expeditions, study archival documents and maps, searching for new sites to explore. The walls of my study are adorned with photographs of shipwrecks, seabed maps, and various artifacts recovered from the depths. Each item here has its own story, its own mystery. My life is far from easy. The work of an exploratory diver requires not only physical fitness and technical skills, but also significant financial investment. Renting a vessel, purchasing equipment, and obtaining research permits all come at a steep cost. As a result, I spend much of my time not on romantic dives to historical relics, but fulfilling contracts for various companies, inspecting underwater structures, searching for lost cargo, and maintaining offshore installations. These jobs pay well and fund my personal research. The past few months have been particularly tough financially. A major client, an oil company, unexpectedly terminated a contract due to changes in their offshore development plans. This left me without my primary source of income for months ahead. The bank started sending notices about overdue loan payments taken out for new equipment. I had to sell some of the less valuable artifacts from my collection, which was a blow to my pride. Each of those items was a witness to history, and parting with them felt like selling pieces of my own soul. In such moments, I felt loneliness acutely. I had few friends. My line of work doesn't lend itself to a social life. Most acquaintances didn't understand my passion for exploring the ocean depths, dismissing it as a dangerous whim. Women rarely stayed in my life for long. They struggled to accept that I could disappear for weeks on maritime expeditions, that my thoughts were consumed by plans for the next dive, that my home had more photos of shipwrecks than of living people. The only truly close person in my life was my sister, Elena, who lives in the capital. She works at a maritime history museum and, unlike others, understands and shares my passion for underwater archaeology. She often helped with my research, providing access to archival documents and historical references. Our weekly phone calls were the only consistent human connection in my life. Elena constantly worried about my loneliness and financial struggles, urging me to move to the city and find a more stable job. But I couldn't abandon the sea. It had become an inseparable part of my existence. Physically, I kept myself in top shape. Daily workouts, swimming in any weather, and specialized exercises to strengthen my lungs were essential for safe deep-sea work. At 42, I felt better than many 30-year-olds. The sea had toughened me, made me resilient and patient. But the financial stress of recent months began to take a toll on my health. I started sleeping poorly, often waking in the middle of the night, plagued by anxious thoughts about the future. My appetite faded. Food seemed tasteless when my mind was heavy. Evenings were spent in my study, poring over seabed maps and dreaming of new discoveries. My desk was cluttered with reports on unexplored sites identified by various expeditions in recent years. Most of them lay in the territorial waters of different countries, requiring official permits for exploration. The process of obtaining such permits could take years, and the cost of expeditions ran into tens of thousands of dollars. All this seemed unattainable in my current financial state. One of those maps showed the seabed in a region of the North Sea where, according to sonar data, the remains of several unidentified ships rested. This area was in international waters, theoretically allowing exploration without special permits. However, the depth reached 80 meters, requiring specialized equipment and posing additional risks during dives. I had often considered organizing an expedition to this region, but the lack of funding always held me back. My days followed a monotonous rhythm. Mornings began with a run along the shore, followed by a simple breakfast and work on documents and maps until noon. Afternoons were dedicated to training in the pool or dives in coastal waters to stay in shape. Evenings were for reading specialized literature, studying new underwater exploration technologies, and corresponding with colleagues worldwide. This routine helped me avoid dwelling on my problems, immersing myself fully in my professional work, but loneliness still crept in. I felt it most keenly during meals. Sitting at a large oak table in the dining room, big enough for a family of 6, I felt the emptiness of the house. The sound of the surf outside, once soothing, now seemed too loud in the silence of empty rooms. Sometimes I turned on the radio or TV just to hear human voices, but it only deepened my sense of isolation from the world. My equipment required constant maintenance and upgrades. Breathing apparatuses, wetsuits, underwater lights, and measuring instruments were expensive and had a limited lifespan. Maintaining decompression equipment, critical for safe deep-sea diving, was particularly costly. Each month, a significant portion of my meager budget went toward keeping my gear in working order. This was non-negotiable. Cutting corners on safety in my profession is unthinkable. Despite all the hardships, I couldn't imagine myself in any other career. The underwater world held a unique magic that had captivated me since childhood. Time flowed differently in the ocean's depths, where silence and tranquility reigned, unattainable on the surface. Each dive to a shipwreck was like traveling in a time machine. Touching objects that had rested on the seabed for decades connected me to the people of the past, their hopes, fears, and dreams. These experiences kept me going despite life's challenges. Lately, I've been reflecting more on the purpose of my work. What am I searching for in these underwater ruins? Fame, money, or something deeper and more intangible? Perhaps I'm seeking answers to questions I can't even articulate. The sea holds thousands of stories, each capable of reshaping our understanding of the past. But the more I delve into these explorations, the more I feel that something vital eludes me, remaining just out of reach in the ocean's depths. Fate intervened in a way that brought an unexpected solution to my financial deadlock. In mid-October, as storm winds began signaling the approach of winter, I received a call from Dr. Harald Ekberg, a Norwegian maritime historian I had met years ago at a conference in Copenhagen. His voice carried an unusual mix of excitement and unease, a stark departure from his typically reserved demeanor. Ekberg informed me that he had secured funding from a private foundation to investigate a mysterious object in the North Sea, and he needed an experienced diver for the underwater work. The story he shared was both intriguing and peculiar. 3 months earlier, Norwegian fishermen working in a remote part of the North Sea had hauled up unusual items in their nets. Among them were fragments of ship planking covered in unfamiliar symbols, several objects made of darkened metal with unclear purposes, and scraps of fabric that, despite years in seawater, retained a strikingly vivid crimson hue. Most perplexing was that these artifacts didn't match any known types of vessels used in these waters over the past 300 years. Ekberg's preliminary analysis revealed anomalies that defied conventional maritime archaeology. The metal contained traces of rare elements typical of 18th century metallurgy, yet its processing seemed more advanced than techniques of that era. The symbols on the planking didn't correspond to any known maritime markings or national emblems. Even more astonishing, the fabric retained elasticity and strength, nearly impossible after decades in saltwater. All this suggested the existence of a ship that had somehow slipped through the cracks of historical records. The private foundation funding the research belonged to a Mr. Van Hoff, a Dutch collector of maritime antiquities. Ekberg emphasized that the contract's terms were exceptionally generous but demanded absolute confidentiality until the work was complete. No information could leak to the press or academic circles until final results were obtained. This condition suited me fine. I always preferred working away from prying eyes, and the secrecy added an allure to the project. The fee Ekberg offered was 3 times my usual rate. It was enough to not only resolve my immediate financial troubles, but also fund my own research for a full year. Yet something in his tone made me wary. His usual scholarly precision was replaced by a feverish haste, and he seemed to be withholding something. When I pressed for more details about the find, he deflected, citing confidentiality requirements. Despite my reservations, my financial situation left me no choice. I accepted the offer, and within a week, the small research vessel Nordkapp set sail from the Norwegian port of Tromsø, heading toward the designated coordinates. The crew consisted of 4. Captain Lars Hansen, a seasoned mariner with 30 years of experience, his assistant Niels, a capable young man, Sven, the radio operator, and myself. Dr. Ekberg was on board as the expedition's scientific lead, but his behavior grew increasingly odd with each passing day. The journey to the presumed wreck site took 2 days. The weather was surprisingly calm for the season, the sea gently rocking our vessel as if lulling us before the events to come. I used the time to prepare my equipment and study the available materials on the find. The photographs Ekberg showed me were indeed unusual. The symbols resembled a mix of runic script and older, unfamiliar writing, while the metal objects had shapes that defied categorization as known ship equipment. Our destination was a poorly explored part of the North Sea, about 150 kilometers from the nearest shore. The area was notorious for unpredictable currents and frequent storms, which explained why researchers rarely ventured there. The depth at the presumed wreck site was around 70 meters, manageable for an experienced diver but requiring strict safety protocols. During the journey, I tried several times to draw Ekberg into discussing the details of the upcoming research, but he became increasingly withdrawn and nervous. At times, he seemed frightened by the expedition, though he evaded direct questions. One evening, as we stood by the railing watching the sunset, I caught him muttering to himself in Norwegian. When I asked what he was thinking, he flinched as if snapping out of a trance, and quickly retreated to his cabin. Captain Hansen, a practical and taciturn man, also seemed uneasy. Over dinner, he mentioned that fishermen in these waters sometimes encountered strange phenomena: sudden fogs in clear weather, erratic navigation readings, and unexplained noises from the depths. Locals considered the area cursed and avoided it. Hansen spoke with a smirk, as if dismissing superstitions, but his eyes betrayed the caution of a seasoned sailor who knew the sea held mysteries beyond rational explanation. On the second day, we reached the coordinates. The sea here had an unusual hue, darker than normal, with a faint greenish tint. The sonar showed a flat seabed at 72 meters, but it occasionally detected anomalous objects that appeared and vanished from the screen. Hansen checked the equipment multiple times, ruling out technical malfunctions. The instruments were functioning perfectly. Preparing for the first dive took several hours. I meticulously checked my breathing apparatus, diving suit, underwater lights, and measuring devices. Special attention went to the surface communication system. Any failure at this depth could be fatal. The plan for the first dive was straightforward. Descend to the seabed, survey the area, locate the presumed wreck, and take initial photographs for analysis. The dive began at noon under clear skies and calm seas. The first 20 meters were uneventful, just the usual darkening water as depth increased. But around 30 meters, I noticed something odd. The water didn't just grow darker, it took on an unnatural hue, as if infused with particles of ancient dust. The temperature, which should have dropped with depth, remained strangely stable. At 50 meters, I switched on my underwater lights. Their beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the water ahead. That's when I saw the first signs of something unusual. Particles in the beam moved not randomly, like typical marine debris, but as if following an invisible pattern, forming intricate spirals and swirls that gave the impression the water was alive and breathing. Reaching the seabed, I found myself on a relatively flat, sandy plain covered with a thin layer of silt. Visibility was limited to 10 or 15 meters, but within that range, I could make out the outline of something large and dark. As I approached, I realized it was indeed the remains of a ship, but not the kind I expected. The ship was massive, likely over 80 meters long, making it one of the largest vessels of its presumed era, possibly the 18th century. What stunned me most was its state of preservation. Wooden ships typically decay into scattered debris after centuries underwater, eaten by marine worms and eroded by time. This ship, however, lay almost intact, as if it had sunk only a few years ago. The hull was made of dark wood that not only retained its structure but seemed coated in a protective substance, giving it a metallic sheen. Rows of cannon ports along the sides suggested a military purpose. The masts were broken, but their bases still rose above the deck. The sails were gone, but parts of the rigging hung in the water like seaweed. I began a systematic survey, photographing every detail. The ship's bow, where a name or identifying marks might be, was partially buried in silt. Clearing the sand by hand, I uncovered carved symbols etched deeply into the wood and filled with a metal that hadn't tarnished. The carvings followed a style unlike any maritime tradition I knew. The deck was remarkably well preserved, with wooden planks showing traces of footsteps and objects, as if the crew had abandoned ship recently. Scattered across the deck were ropes, metal hooks, and fragments of tools, all covered in a thin layer of marine growth but otherwise intact. Entering the ship through a breach in the hull, I felt an indescribable sensation, as if the ship wasn't dead but merely sleeping in the depths, awaiting reawakening. Every movement stirred small clouds of silt that rose and settled slowly, giving the impression the ship was breathing. The sounds I made while moving across the deck felt muffled and distorted, as if the ship absorbed and transformed them. Exploring the interior required caution. Many passages were blocked by debris or filled with silt, but some cabins remained accessible. In the captain's cabin, located at the stern, I found remnants of furniture and personal items. A massive oak table stood in the center, strewn with objects that made me question my own eyes. Maps on the table were made of a material that resembled neither paper nor parchment, shimmering with an odd iridescence and untouched by water damage. They depicted coastlines that didn't match the modern North Sea's geography. Islands appeared where only open water exists today, and familiar shores had entirely different outlines. Nearby navigation instruments crafted with astonishing precision didn't resemble any known maritime tools. In a corner of the cabin was a chest partially buried in silt. Its lid opened surprisingly easily, as if the lock had been recently oiled. Inside were items that convinced me this ship held secrets beyond ordinary archaeology. Books bound in unfamiliar leather, metal plates engraved with symbols and objects of indeterminate purpose. One book was written in a language blending Latin with unfamiliar symbols and structures. Flipping through its pages underwater, I noticed the text remained sharp, as if written in ink impervious to seawater. Some pages featured diagrams, possibly astronomical observations or navigational calculations based on principles I didn't recognize. My first dive's time limit approached, and I needed to begin my ascent. Decompression protocols for such depths required gradual surfacing with stops at various levels. Leaving the ship was reluctant. Each minute brought new mysteries. I took a final series of photos, grabbed one of the metal plates from the chest, and began my slow ascent. Decompression went smoothly, but my mind was consumed by what I'd seen. The ship was an archaeological find of extraordinary significance, yet its uncanny preservation and strange artifacts raised questions I couldn't answer rationally. When I surfaced aboard the Nordkapp, the crew's faces showed eager curiosity, but Ekberg looked more alarmed than intrigued. Showing the team my photographs sparked a commotion. Even Captain Hansen, who'd seen many maritime wonders, was stunned by the ship's condition. The metal plate I brought up became the focus of intense scrutiny. Its symbols were engraved with mathematical precision, and the metal's composition didn't match any known 18th century alloys. Ekberg took the plate for preliminary analysis and locked himself in his cabin for hours. When he emerged, his face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly. To my questions about his findings, he responded evasively, saying only that the discovery exceeded all expectations and required further study. His behavior, feverish excitement mixed with fear, made me increasingly uneasy about the expedition's true purpose. That evening, as the crew rested after a tense day, I noticed Ekberg standing by the railing, staring into the dark waters. Approaching him, I overheard him muttering in an unfamiliar language. When I called out, he turned sharply, and I saw a look in his eyes that could only be described as terror. Something about our discovery frightened him far more than he was willing to admit. The night was restless. I woke several times to strange sounds emanating from the depths. At first I thought they were the usual noises of the ship or the sea, but I soon realized there was something else. It sounded like distant music or chanting, barely audible amidst the waves. The melody was captivating yet unsettling, as if beckoning towards something best left undisturbed. When I went on deck to investigate, the sound ceased, leaving only the familiar crash of waves against the hull. In the morning, Captain Hansen reported technical issues with the navigation equipment. The compass gave erratic readings, the GPS intermittently lost signal, and the sonar detected moving objects at depths where none should exist. Sven, our radio operator, complained of interference and strange signals breaking through standard maritime frequencies. These anomalies began right after my first dive to the wreck, which couldn't be a coincidence. Dr. Ekberg insisted on continuing the research despite the technical problems. He grew increasingly nervous and irritable, constantly scribbling in his notebook and making calculations. When I pressed him about what had him so agitated, he muttered something about needing to complete the work quickly. His behavior bordered on manic obsession, raising my concerns about the expedition's safety. For my second dive, I planned to focus on a detailed exploration of the ship's interior, particularly the crew's living quarters. If the ship was as well preserved as my initial survey suggested, there might be items shedding light on the crew's identity and the circumstances of the ship's sinking. Descending for the second time, I immediately noticed changes in the environment. The water was murkier than the previous day, and the currents were strangely unpredictable. My usual descent techniques, honed over years of practice, faltered. I had to constantly adjust my buoyancy and direction, as if unseen forces were trying to throw me off course. My underwater lights also behaved oddly. Their beams seemed dimmer and unnaturally diffused. Reaching the ship, I encountered another anomaly. The silt that had lightly covered the deck the day before was almost entirely gone, as if someone had swept the ship clean. Items previously scattered were now neatly arranged, ropes coiled, tools stacked, even mast fragments organized. This could only result from human activity. But who could have descended here in the past 24 hours? Entering the hull through the same breach as before, I headed toward the living quarters. The ship's corridors were remarkably preserved, their wooden paneling retaining its original color and texture. Some sections even bore decorative carvings and metal ornaments that gleamed under my lights, as if recently polished. The first cabin I entered likely belonged to an officer. The small space was furnished with typical military ship functionality: a narrow bunk, a writing desk, and a few lockers for personal items. But the condition of the contents was astonishing. The bed was neatly made, as if its occupant had just risen and planned to return. On the desk lay documents written in a clear hand, alongside an inkwell and quill that looked ready for use. Attempting to read the documents, I found they were written in the same incomprehensible language as the books in the captain's cabin. Some phrases contained words vaguely resembling Latin or old Germanic dialects. From what I could decipher, they described a journey, not a typical trade or military voyage, but an expedition with otherworldly goals. References to gates between worlds, ancient knowledge, and the price to be paid sent a chill through me. Other cabins presented a similar scene. Everything suggested the crew had temporarily left, but intended to return. Personal belongings were in place, clothes hung on hooks, and even smoking pipes contained traces of tobacco. Most baffling was the complete absence of human remains. A ship submerged for decades should have held at least skeletal traces of its crew, but I found none. Descending to the hold, I discovered a cargo that confirmed this ship was extraordinary. Instead of typical goods or military supplies, the hold was filled with what could only be described as occult artifacts. Stone slabs with engraved symbols, metal structures of unknown purpose, and numerous books and scrolls packed in waterproof containers were arranged with mathematical precision, each item in its designated place. At the center of the hold stood a massive black stone structure resembling an altar or sacrificial table. Its surface was covered intricate patterns of interlocking lines and symbols that seemed to pulse under my lights. Touching the stone, I felt a faint vibration, as if something inside was alive. The water around the altar was noticeably warmer than elsewhere on the ship, defying any scientific explanation. Examining the hold's contents, I noticed many items were made from materials impossible for the 18th century. Metal components had compositions akin to modern alloys, yet bore marks of ancient crafting techniques. The books were written on a material neither paper nor parchment, completely waterproof and retaining elasticity despite prolonged submersion. My time at depth was running out, but I decided to risk a few more minutes to explore the ship's most enigmatic area, a chamber at the bow, accessible via narrow stairs from the hold. Descending, I felt the environment shift. The water grew denser, my movements slowed, and sounds took on a strange echo, as if I were in a vast cavern rather than underwater. The chamber was circular, with a high vaulted ceiling. Its walls bore frescoes preserved with startling clarity, depicting scenes unlike any known mythology or religious tradition. strange creatures with tentacled faces, underwater cities with impossible architecture, and robed figures performing cryptic rituals before altars like the one in the hold adorned the walls. At the chamber's center stood another altar, crafted from a material that seemed alive. Its surface shimmered, shifting from deep black to dark green. Touching it, I felt not just vibration, but a pulsing, like a giant heartbeat. The water's temperature spiked, and strange light glints appeared around me. Their source, untraceable. Suddenly, moving shadows emerged in the water. At first I thought they were tricks of light or my imagination, but they grew more distinct, moving with purpose as if observing me. Directing my light at one, it didn't vanish but became clearer. A figure in a long cloak, its face hidden by a hood, staring directly at me. Panic gripped me with unexpected force. Years of diving had accustomed me to the solitude of the depths, but these shadows evoked primal terror. I sensed I was in the presence of something that shouldn't exist, something beyond the natural world. The figures began closing in, their movements creating no ripples, as if they were projections from another dimension. Deciding not to tempt fate, I hurried toward the chamber's exit. But as I turned to the stairs, an invisible force held me, like giant hands gripping my body. Breathing became labored, though my oxygen tank showed normal pressure. Then I heard sounds I'll never forget. A chorus of voices chanting in the same incomprehensible language from the ship's documents. The chanting grew louder and clearer as the cloaked figures performed synchronized ritual movements around the altar. Their actions were precise, as if repeating a ceremony countless times. The altar glowed brighter, and the water around it boiled, sending streams of bubbles upward that vanished into the ceiling. Suddenly, the invisible force released me and I could move. Wasting no time, I rushed to the stairs and began my ascent, not looking back. The chanting followed, growing more intense and menacing. The ship seemed to resonate with the sound, its wooden structure vibrating in time with the eerie melody. Emerging from the chamber, I noticed the ship's interior had changed. Corridors, empty moments ago, were now filled with moving shadows. They didn't block my path but followed, creating the sensation of moving through an invisible crowd. The water's temperature kept rising and my breathing equipment began malfunctioning. Reaching the deck, I saw the entire ship enveloped in a strange glow, not from my lights, but from within its structure, as if the wood were infused with a phosphorescent substance. In this light, I saw numerous figures on the deck and in the rigging, spectral remnants of the crew, translucent and barely human in form. One figure, likely the captain given his ornate attire, stood at the helm, staring at me. His eyes held no malice, only sorrow and warning. He raised a hand, as if trying to speak, but no sound reached me underwater. Yet, inexplicably, I understood his message. The ship and its crew were cursed, bound to this place by a horrific force, and my presence was awakening something that should remain undisturbed. Unwilling to linger, I left the deck and began my ascent to the surface. Decompression felt endless. Every minute above the wreck was filled with the sense of an ancient, hostile presence. The chanting echoed from below, and fleeting shadows flickered in my peripheral vision as if bidding me farewell. When I finally surfaced aboard the Nordkap, the crew's state overshadowed my own ordeal. All four, Captain Hansen, Niels, Sven, and Dr. Ekberg, looked deeply shaken. During my dive, strange phenomena had plagued the ship. Navigation equipment failed completely, radio communication cut out, and sounds emanated from the water, heard by all. Hansen likened them to mermaid songs, Niels to whale calls, but all agreed they were unnatural and terrifying. Dr. Ekberg was near hysteria. He claimed to have seen moving lights and shadows rising from the depths, circling the ship during my absence. His notes from that time were chaotic sketches and symbols, many eerily similar to those on the wreck. When I showed him my second dive's photographs, he paled and began muttering in Norwegian, slipping into the strange language from the ship's documents. Reflecting on the day, I realized our expedition had taken an unexpected turn. We weren't dealing with a mere historical artifact, but something actively affecting reality. The ship wasn't a dead relic, but a nexus of forces I couldn't comprehend or control. The ghostly crew, altered water properties, and interference with electronics pointed to a phenomenon beyond conventional science. That evening, as the crew tried to recover from the day's stress, I noticed changes in the water around the Nordkapp. The usually calm sea grew restless, with frequent chaotic waves moving against the wind's direction. At times, it seemed something massive moved beneath, stirring the surface. The sonar detected large objects at various depths, but when we focused on them, they vanished or shifted position with impossible speed. The night brought events that forever altered the course of our expedition. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by Sven's scream from the deck. Rushing from my cabin, I found our radio operator pointing into the dark water, his face contorted in horror. His trembling hand gestured toward the sea, where a strange greenish glow pulsed from the depths. Unlike the bioluminescence of plankton or marine life, this light throbbed rhythmically, as if a colossal heart beat somewhere below. Captain Hansen joined us on deck, his usual seafaring confidence replaced by bewilderment. Even his decades of experience hadn't prepared him for what was unfolding around our vessel. The glow intensified, revealing massive shapes moving beneath the surface, too large to be sea creatures moving with a purpose that ruled out chance. Dr. Ekberg was the last to appear, but his behavior was the strangest. He showed no surprise or fear, as if he had anticipated these events. Clutching one of the books retrieved from the wreck, he read from it, reciting words in the incomprehensible language I'd seen in the ship's documents. His voice blended with other sounds from the water, the same chanting I'd heard during my dive. Suddenly, the sea around our vessel began to churn. Not boiling in the literal sense, but the surface erupted in bubbles and whirlpools, as if something enormous was rising. The air temperature spiked, and a fog appeared on the horizon, moving against the wind with the same greenish hue as the underwater glow. It approached at an unnatural speed, swallowing the stars and moon, plunging the sea into absolute darkness. Hansen rushed to the helm, trying to start the engine and steer us away, but all electrical systems failed. The radio was silent, navigation instruments displayed chaotic readings, and the compass spun wildly. We were cut off from the world, adrift in a sea that no longer obeyed natural laws. Niels tried to activate the emergency generator, but it wouldn't respond. The fog enveloped our vessel, reducing visibility to a few meters. The air grew thick and damp, as if we were in an underground cavern rather than the open sea. Within the fog, indistinct shapes emerged. Ships, buildings, or colossal creatures with no clear boundaries. They circled us, creating the sensation that we were at the center of a gathering of supernatural forces. Ekberg continued reading, his voice no longer human but part of the chorus echoing around us. His eyes glowed with the same greenish hue as the water, and his movements became mechanical, as if driven by an external will. When I approached him, he turned, and I saw his face had changed. Sharper features, waxy skin, and eyes reflecting a mind no longer human. From the fog, the cloaked figures I'd seen on the wreck materialized. On the surface, they appeared more real and menacing. Rising from the water without a splash, they moved across the deck, leaving no trace, and encircled us silently. Their presence induced physical discomfort, nausea, dizziness, and a sense that reality was unraveling. Sven was the first to break under the psychological strain. He screamed that he wanted to go home, that this was all wrong, that we needed to leave. His cries echoed in the fog, but the returning sound was distorted, as if passing through unnatural spaces. Gradually his screams faded, and he stood motionless, staring blankly with wide eyes. Hansen tried to rouse him, but when he touched Sven's shoulder, the radio man collapsed. His body was cold, as if submerged in icy water, despite the warm air. His pulse was faint, his breathing barely perceptible, and his eyes stared blankly, unresponsive to light or sound. It was as if his soul had left, leaving an empty shell. Niels succumbed minutes later. The young man, usually so resilient, froze mid-action, his face taking on the same waxy expression as Sven's. His eyes reflected the greenish glow surrounding us. Hansen's attempts to shake him awake were futile. The captain, now alone with the unfolding nightmare, showed signs of a nervous breakdown. His hands trembled, his speech became incoherent, and his gaze darted between the motionless crew and the ghostly figures emerging from the fog. He tried praying, reciting fragments of childhood prayers, but the words sounded hollow in this supernatural setting. Ekberg's reading continued, the book in his hands glowing with the same green light. Its pages turned on their own, and the symbols shifted, as if rewritten by invisible hands. His voice became a chorus of countless voices, speaking in languages never heard in human speech. Suddenly, something massive rose beside our vessel. At first it was just ripples, then the outline of a vast structure. Slowly the sunken ship I'd explored emerged from the depths, not as an archaeological relic, but as a living, breathing entity. Its wooden hull pulsed, its masts swayed without wind, and green light streamed from its cannon ports. The ghost ship positioned itself alongside ours, connected by bridges of the same unnatural light. Its spectral crew crossed over, their movements more like flowing than walking, leaving glowing trails in the air. Each bore the mark of a horrific death and a curse binding them to this place for centuries. Hansen tried to reach the lifeboat but found himself unable to move, as if chained to the deck by invisible forces. His attempts to scream produced only hoarse gasps, swallowed by the fog. I stood just meters away, but his cries didn't reach me. I realized my time was running out. The ghostly figures tightened their circle around me, and with each step, my will weakened, my mind clouded. Their presence made thoughts sluggish, memories jumbled, and reality distorted. I struggled to hold on to who I was and why I was here. But those basic truths began slipping away. Ekberg finished his reading and closed the books. At that moment, reality shattered completely. The fog lifted, but instead of the familiar night sky, an alien vista appeared. Stars formed impossible constellations, the moon glowed an unnatural red, and silhouettes of cities that couldn't exist in our world loomed on the horizon. The sea transformed, turning a deep purple and viscous like oil. Strange objects floated within it, neither plants nor animals, but something between living and dead, real and imagined. They moved with purpose, forming intricate patterns on the surface. Hansen was the next to fall. His body went limp, eyes rolled back, and foam dribbled from his mouth. He didn't die in the conventional sense. His breathing continued, his heart beat. But his soul seemed gone. His body, an empty vessel controlled by an alien will. Ekberg approached me, his transformation even more advanced. His skin was translucent, revealing dark structures unlike human organs. His voice was a whisper of countless dead, his eyes reflecting worlds that shouldn't exist. He extended a hand, an invitation to follow him into the abyss. Resisting grew harder. The ghostly figures drained my life force, each breath a struggle, each movement requiring superhuman effort. My consciousness began dissolving into their collective mind, my individuality fading into their alien will. In my final moments of clarity, I understood the truth. The sunken ship wasn't just a vessel, but a gateway between worlds. Its crew had long ago made a pact with entities dwelling in the spaces between realities, gaining knowledge and power at the cost of their souls. They became eternal guardians of these gates, and we, unknowingly, became new sacrifices to their ancient bargain. Ekberg wasn't merely a scientist. He was a descendant of that cursed crew, his blood calling him back to this place. He knew what would happen when we arrived, but his longing to reunite with his dead ancestors outweighed his fear of death. He used us as keys to unlock gates that should have remained sealed. The last thing I recall as an individual was a ghostly hand touching my forehead. Its cold wasn't physical but spiritual, freezing the essence of my being, turning my soul into an empty husk. My memories merged with those of the dead, my thoughts blended with theirs, and my will dissolved into their collective consciousness. Time lost meaning in this state. I might have existed like this for days, months, or centuries. In the realm of the dead, time follows different rules. Occasionally, fragments of human consciousness returned, and I grasped the horror of my situation. But these moments of clarity were rare and fleeting. Mostly, I existed as part of the ghostly crew's collective mind, performing incomprehensible functions. Our vessel joined a flotilla of ghost ships drifting through the waters between worlds. We patrolled the boundaries of reality, preventing stray travelers from entering places meant to remain hidden. But sometimes, when the stars align and currents shift in specific ways, we return to the world of the living to find new recruits for our eternal service. The bodies of our expedition will never be found. Official reports will cite a storm that sank our vessel with no survivors. But sometimes, fishermen in these waters will haul up strange objects, wreckage of non-existent ships, covered in symbols that pain the mind. On foggy nights, the sensitive will hear sounds from the depths, the chants of the dead, calling the living to join their eternal dance between worlds. My cliffside home stands empty, awaiting a master who will never return. My sister Elena will call a phone that goes unanswered and send letters that remain unread. But one day, her curiosity will lead her to search for the truth of my disappearance. Then the sea will claim another soul for its collection, and I'll gain a companion in my eternal wanderings between life and death. The gates between worlds are open, and no force can close them. The ancient knowledge we unwittingly awaken continues to seep into our world, reshaping it in its image. Soon, the sea will cease to be mere water, becoming a living entity feeding on the fears and souls of those who dare challenge it. I remain an eternal witness to this process, forever bound to the ship that is my prison and my curse. In the depths, where time holds no sway and death offers no peace, I continue my existence as part of a force that will one day consume the world of the living.